Welcome to
Come on, Jay.
Hey, great shot.
This is the Great Shot Podcast, a Cracked Racquets and Believe Podcast Network production. My name is Alex Gruskin. On tonight's show, we've got a live NCAA draw reveal reaction podcast where we, like all of you, will react to our first look at the 2025 college tennis postseason. That's right, folks. We have officially arrived. The NCAA tournament begins this weekend. It was obviously such a privilege to be able to be a part of the selection show once again this year, and with those selection shows now officially in the books, the draw is publicly available. All that's left to do is to react to what this postseason might look like. That, of course, is what we want to do here tonight. Offer initial reactions, break down who likes their draw, who doesn't, what were the biggest surprises in teams going to specific regionals. Of course, we will go further in depth, offer predictions Tuesday, Wednesday night. Of course, our coverage of the first two rounds begins Friday on ESPN+. Make sure your subscription is renewed so you don't miss out on any of the action. A thank you in advance to our friends at Laurel Springs, of course, for their support. We got a lot of live shows coming up. That's only possible because of their support. Again, laurelsprings.com for more information on the Laurel Springs School. But joining me tonight to help for our live reaction to the 2025 NCAA Division I Women's and Men's Tournament draws, the two men who have joined me all season long and join me each and every year in helping break down every twist, every turn of the college tennis season. Let's start with the man to my left on the screen, the man you all know best as the returning champion of returning champions to our Great Shot Podcast, of course, host and founder of the No Ad, No Problem blog and podcast, our on-the-ground correspondent for so much of this 2025 season, and one of our dearest friends. It's John J. Parsons joining us once again. Jay, hey, Great Shot. Welcome back to the show. We've got tournament draws, my friend. You as excited as I am?
I'm very excited. We have a very interesting next few weeks ahead of us, and it all starts here with the bracket reveal.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is where every team can begin to dream, hey, can we hoist that trophy come the end of this postseason? And yeah, we're very much looking forward to all the mayhem, dry running that here on tonight's show, that may unfold. Of course, speaking of mayhem, his phone has been absolute mayhem, as every coach in anticipation of the release today wanted to know, am I in? Am I out? Where am I heading? Of course, maybe no one has done a better job of educating us on what that selection process looks like, what that formula looks like, and allowing us to monitor for that formula throughout the course of the season than the man to my right here tonight. Of course, you all know him best as the forefather of the College Tennis Ranks formula predictions, never far from the listed UTR, the lean, mean Michigan Wolverine, the professor, and dare I say, a man who now becomes significantly less popular with this hour behind us. It's our dear friend Chris Halioris joining us once again. Chris, hey, Great Shot. Welcome back to the program. You ready for the mayhem to ensue?
I'm ready. Look, Gruskin, I am certainly not going to come on here and boost your ego at all, but I haven't seen Jay since November. Jay looks fit. Like, props to you, Jay. You definitely 5 months. You've done some work, I can tell.
I said this as well. Jay, the jaw looks exceptional tonight, and this is how we should look in postseason form, ready to bring our best. That's what we will do here tonight. Sorry, if you want to respond to our compliments on your looks, Jay, I should let you do so.
Well, I got a few texts about how many runs Gruskin was going on, and I figured I needed to match some of that energy.
It's true. When I am trying to get frustration out, that each of these men receive texts of me saying, I got to go for a run. I'll talk to you guys later. But rather than pontificate upon the distance and meaning behind my runs, let's talk about the runs these teams are going to have the opportunity to go on. Again, what we want to do here tonight, break down the draw and break it down from every aspect that we're all thinking about, of course. Who have the best paths to the final site in Waco? Who finds that this next month's going to get a little difficult as they try to maneuver through this postseason? And first and foremost, were there any surprises right out of the gates as we look at this draw? And there were two things we wanted to monitor. Let's talk about the most impactful first. Texas A&M, obviously what they were able to do throughout the course of this season, they were consistently in that top 16 hunt, but with some struggles, some late season losses that they had taken, they had fallen to 18th in the projected final rankings according to Chris's website. And yet, as will be further explained by chair of the NCAA Tennis Committee, Chris Young, at the end of today's show, had the chance to speak with him about the biggest questions in the draw. There is a formula that the NCAA selection committee uses in determining these draws. And if you know that formula, you know when the points between teams in the rankings is negligible, you turn to the tie breaks. There are 4 criteria to turn to: ITA rankings points, head-to-head victory, records versus comparable opponents, and top 50 total wins or wins against NCAA tournament teams, which ultimately turns into top 50 victories. By those criteria, number 18 Texas A&M, they get to flip-flop over Duke. They get to flip-flop with a UCLA team that obviously is fresh off of a Big Ten Conference Tournament title. We'll talk about them more, I'm sure, on Wednesday with you, Chris. But the biggest question was, again, would this double flop tiebreak rule be honored? And it was. And so Texas A&M, by rule, should be the 16 seed. They are the 16 seed, even if they aren't going to finish 16th in the rankings. Chris Halioris, this is where I have to give a shout-out to you. You prepared us all for this moment. Would have been a lot of angry tennis fans in College Station knocking on your door had you been wrong. You weren't. Shout out to you again. But this was the expected outcome. Is it at all a surprise?
There's always a little bit of surprise, only because you're waiting for, right? There still is a committee, and you're waiting for that first year that they decide to go, nah, you know what? Maybe not. Like, I think it was Jeff McMillan that posted on there that effectively the difference in that tie break, which I hadn't even noticed, came down to A&M had 12 top 50 wins. UCLA had 11. At those top 50 wins, Rice was A&M's 12th at number 50. UCLA with a win over Oregon at number 51. Like, that literally came down to the difference. And so is there a world where I could have seen the committee going, yeah, I know we have that on paper, but like, we're still a committee for a reason. Let's do something different. And yeah, I had someone unnamed from College Station calling me going, if you're wrong, there's 15 Aggies flying up to kick your you-know-what tomorrow. And I'm like, hey, man, like, it's a projection. But no, I'll say I did firmly believe they would stand by it. But there was just that little bit of skepticism as to there's always going to be a first for everything. Why not now?
Yeah, no, and had they broken that rule, I'm sure. Well, you know what? I'll let look. I guess I'll speak for it now. Spoiler alert. You break the rule once, then the question becomes, why not break that everywhere?
Yeah.
And they are very much formula-centric because they are not a part of that pilot program that soccer, volleyball are a part of. And Chris talks about why this committee is going to, again, apply to become a part of that pilot program, which they believe, with the 14 pods it offers better parity across the draw than the current format indicates. That's not the rule with the current format. And certainly, again, Jay, I want your thoughts on all things Texas A&M, supplanting Duke, supplanting UCLA, who both had certainly impressive conference tournaments. I also want your thoughts on, again, that same logic being applied in the decision to send an Oklahoma State team that's going to finish top 20 to number 6 Oklahoma in the opening weekend. And again, that's the rule. Oklahoma State was over 400 miles away, not by much, but over 400 miles away, ultimately from Texas. They were over 400 miles away from Texas A&M. The only place they could drive to was Oklahoma, and that's the number one precedent, and it was a precedent they abided by once again. Your reaction to those two decisions, because certainly those were the two biggest what-ifs if the committee was going to play around this year.
Well, they're two different questions, right? One is about, do you deviate from the formula, and the other is how important is being under 400 miles relative to bracket integrity. And based on the last few years, one, they're not going to deviate from the formula, and two, being under 400 miles and being quote unquote within driving distance is more important than bracket integrity. That has been proven out now the last few years, and we have more evidence because we have Chris's website. We know what the formula would tell us, and now we know that the committee is going straight formula and trying to optimize for the fewest number of flights.
Yeah, and that's precisely what they did. The Texas A&M front, how comfortable are you with UCLA now being left out of the top 16 after being just the third team again in 20 years to get a win in Columbus over the Buckeyes?
If you're Texas A&M?
Well, just you in general, as an outside observer, how do you feel?
Look, common sense would tell you this is a Texas A&M team that's playing some of its worst tennis all year, and a UCLA team that's playing its best tennis all year. And so they're the Big Ten champion. I don't know if either of you know the last time a Power Four or Five conference winner was not seeded. I can't think of one. It's probably been a pretty long time. So common sense would tell you that UCLA is playing top 16 tennis right now. And if I was a committee member, I would be advocating for them to be included in the top 16. And I think that breakdown of the top 50 that Chris talked about, I think it's pretty silly because I think at this point when we're talking about top 16 seeds, whether you have 13 wins over a top 50 team or 12 wins over a top 50 team is a pretty moot point.
I think those are very fair points. Chris, I want to let you respond. I also want to discuss some of the other top 16 seeding rearrangements we saw via tie breaks. Of course, you had Stanford, uh, Ohio State, and San Diego each jumping Virginia falling from fourth in the rankings to seventh in the seeding based upon tie breaks. That was a big one. Obviously, you had Columbia leaping NC State for those 8-9 spots, respectively. Columbia beating NC State at home in the regular season, head-to-head win. You make the flop. On the women's side, it was just still striking that Ohio State, after winning the Big Ten championship last weekend, was all the way up to 4. They earned it. That's what the rankings say. But certainly, again, caught my attention. The one flop of flip-flop. Texas Tech jumps over NC State. Texas Tech, of course, beat NC State during the kickoff weekend. Texas Tech up to 11. NC State up to 12. Down to 12. Again, we were on Auburn watch. Chris's website said they would be 9. Lo and behold, that's a really good number 9 seed, headed perhaps if the seeds hold to number 8 Duke in the round of 16. Chris, your thoughts on all the tie breaks, the flip-flops, Jay's thoughts, as any response you have to Jay as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I agree with everything that's been said, and even that you alluded to that CY is going to tell us so far. I agree with what Jay said on the, but at the same time, what I'll say is obviously a very numbers and quantitative type guy, and I am not in favor of making it a committee decision. What I would be in favor of is, yeah, maybe they need to go and look at the rules and reevaluate and come up with a slightly different formula. But I like the formula aspect. Don't put any, especially when, I mean, look, we've got people in the room like CY, like Jimmy B, like George Husak. I mean, those guys are going to have at some point vested decisions in what happens. And you don't really want them having to either abstain themselves or get involved in any way, shape, or form, or even, and they don't want other people looking at them going, well, yeah, Chris was in the room. Of course they didn't end up at Oklahoma, right? That's the last thing he wanted to hear. So yeah, I like the formula aspect, but could it use a little bit of I know the ITA continually looks at their rankings formula and they're looking at making changes. Could the NCAA do the same? Yeah, sure, possibly. And maybe I'm with Jay, like the top 50 thing, especially when it comes down to like your one win apart and one's over a 50 versus a 51. I mean, again, you got to have a rule. What is it? Could you modify it? Sure, maybe. So until we come up with a better one, I do like the fact that they just go by the rules and there's no subjectivity.
Insight into the formula, thoughts about the appearance of a conflict of interest, all of these different topics, why the pilot program would perhaps provide for better draw integrity, all these things discussed by, again, Chair of the NCAA Tennis Committee, Chris Young, at the end of today's show. So make sure you stick around for it. Those were the two big surprises, were they not, Jay? You get the final word on this topic.
Well, I think the other big surprise was that Virginia fell from number 4 in the ITA rankings down to 7. But assuming that like we have outlined that they're going to go by the formula, they get jumped by Stanford, Ohio State, and San Diego. Feels like a pretty big jump at that high in the seedings. But again, they go by the formula. And so that was not a surprise if you operate under that principle.
Very, very fair. Well, of course, again, those were the big seeding reactions, location reactions. Let's talk about the draw now. And certainly, again, I want to run you through not all 8 quarters and 16 sections of the draw. We will save that, of course, for tomorrow's and Wednesday's podcast. But Let's offer some initial reactions. Obviously, seeds breaking out as they did, first round matchups breaking out as they did. There are a bunch of different good ones. Jay, let's start on the women's side, and I'll start with you. Looking at this draw reveal, who, in your opinion, is feeling best now, 6:29 p.m. Eastern Time, heading into the postseason?
Well, are we going with top 16 seeds who like their projections, or are we just focused on these first two rounds?
Jay, as always, the rules are there are no rules.
I mean, I think a lot of these seeds, it's easier to do the reverse, certainly. Um, but I think a lot of these seeds like where they're at. I mean, top seeds, Georgia, they look pretty good. They probably knew they were going to get Georgia Tech in there. I will say, I think people have been looking towards Auburn and Duke. Both of those two teams were curious about the results of the Big Ten championship because if Ohio State did win, then Auburn would be the 9 seed. But looking at their kind of regionals, I like both of their regionals for them to advance. And so projecting that 8-9 matchup, you want them to be as healthy and fresh as possible. I think they both will be. Certainly Auburn gets a little bit of a tougher test there. I think Duke probably really likes their draw, even if they don't love the fact that Auburn is coming to town in the Super Regional. Other teams, I think Virginia has to be really happy. They are at the 7 seed, but I would say normally they get an even softer regional. They do get Illinois, they do get Arizona, and Fairleigh Dickinson. Sometimes they get even softer than that, but I think they really like that region and being matched up with a 10 seed in Tennessee, who they played already earlier this year at indoors, despite being down several players there. So I think Virginia is probably feeling pretty good as well on the women's side.
Chris, your take on the women's draw?
Yeah, I don't have nearly as many kind of really odd discrepancies over regions. Like I don't like when we get into the men's, I think there were some where like a few hosts that went, Jiminy Christmas, you stacked us, and a few that went, oh, thank you very much. Like I got a 2 and 2 4s. Like I'll take that any day. So I don't think there was as much of that. Now I do think in large part a lot of that came because of almost double the number of mandatory flights in the women's bracket. So it was a lot easier to maintain draw parity in the women's bracket because of the number of teams that couldn't drive anywhere and had to fly. I think it was 22. There were 22 teams out of the 48 that had no options but to fly somewhere. So that led you to a lot of opportunity to keep the draws fairly even. Whereas on the men's side, there were only 13 of those. So I don't see any big. There were none that really jumped out at me as holy cow, that place is stacked, or holy cow, that one's super weak.
Yeah, I do think they did a really good job with draw parity, considering also for the first time in forever, there are no California hosts. There are no hosts in the state of Florida. That did kind of allow some other teams to be dispersed, Jay.
Well, I actually think you're making the point for why integrity might matter over doing the driving restrictions because when you do these driving restrictions, then you're sort of forced your hand on like normally when there are a lot of California schools, you see a Pepperdine going to or USC going to Pepperdine, right? And things like that. And now all those California schools that were 17 through 25 in the rankings, they were all eligible to fly. And so it allowed them to just go up and say, hey, let's take the lowest ranked team, let's map them here. They could go anywhere. And so actually, when you have more flights, you're going to get more draw integrity, which is what I think we're seeing on the women's side. I would say generally both first few rounds, but also more broadly, you look at the top 16 seeds, the women's bracket feels fairly well balanced.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I do think that top right section of the draw where third seeded Michigan resides and sixth seeded Oklahoma resides, you have 14th seeded Texas in that section as well. No disrespect to Texas Tech here. I think all of those teams are happy that they are in this section because you know your opponent. If you're Oklahoma, if you're Texas, you know one another. By the way, both of those teams played Michigan at the National Indoors this season as well. And for teams with more than one freshman significantly contributing to the lineup, it helps to have a familiar opponent. It helps to have a familiar matchup, if that's even the case, is granular than that as well. So I do think all of these teams like being in this section. Stanford was always going to be a fascinated floater. What version of Yepifanova do we get is an open question. How healthy is Shu? How healthy are they ever? To go to Texas Tech, a team that I think is really good, but didn't play the most arduous schedule all season. If you're Stanford, of the regions, and they could have gone anywhere, of the regions they were sent to, Jay's shaking his head, Chris, so I'm going to go back to him because that's the positive affirmation I need in my life. I do think those are some other winners, and I'm fascinated by this Michigan quarter.
Yeah, I mean, we could go through and talk about who the non-seeded winners are, but I think Stanford is a huge winner here. I think other than the fact that they'll need to adjust to Lubbock, tough place to play, of a lot of these schools they could have gone to, they're thrilled to go to Texas Tech. I would also say that a team like Oklahoma is definitely not looking ahead to Michigan. They're not feeling happy right now. They feel like they got screwed, right? Getting Oklahoma State there, that is not a fair balance to some of these other first few rounds. And so I don't think they're looking that far ahead, but Stanford definitely a non-seeded winner. I think there's a few in there as well, like switching up. I think Cal is probably fairly happy to go to Washington. They stay on the West Coast. They don't have to make a cross-country trek, and it's a team that they're very familiar with, even though they're now in different conferences.
Yeah, also very well put. You're right. I only included Oklahoma because I thought if I didn't include them, that would be even more disrespectful than including them with that Oklahoma State draw. But very, very well put by you. By the way, the counter is a Stanford team that hasn't played in Texas wins. Texas Tech wins. Texas Tech elevation. Again, that's a tough road matchup. It's a tough environment to play in. So there's certainly a flip side there. And yeah, Texas Tech is really good everywhere, really strong at the bottom of the lineup, which is obviously the place Stanford has been vulnerable with the injuries this year. All right, those were the obvious winners on the women's side. Let's go to the men's side of things now. Chris, I start with you. As the draw has come out now, you look at all 64 teams. Who stands out to you? Who likes where they're at the most?
If I'm going from the non-hosts, like the first team that jumps out at me that is absolutely jumping for joy with what they ended up with, it's Florida. Like they go to UCF and get USF as a 2 and Miami as a 4. Like if
Good
you're asking,
choice, Chris.
if you're asking for a team that's going to be they're a borderline 2-3 seed for the best possible chance they have to come out of a region, like they're loving where they went. They avoided Florida State. They got to go to UCF. I mean, look, UCF's the 15 seed, so anybody is going to want to try to go to a 15 or 16 first. But then to get USF, who thanks Ashley, I'm sporting your gear today for a great year for them. But if you ask all the coaches, pick all the 2 seeds, where do you want to go? That's a team they're going to want to pick as well. Now, you're gonna kind of get the medicine you ask for, as the top 2 for USF have been unbelievable. What have they lost, like 2 or 3 matches all year, if that, between them? That's tough. But I think that's an absolute winner for somebody that's kind of down there at a 2 seed. There are some hosts that are really, really, really liking their draw. Like Columbia gets the number 62 and 64 teams in the draw in their region. Now, you don't ever expect necessarily a 3 team to come out, but I just called out a Florida who possibly could, right? So yeah, it's the 3 and the 4, but even at that, for Columbia, Clemson, and then the 62-64, very, overall weak. Virginia as well. Virginia is the only school to not get a true 2 seed at their place for a 2 seed. They get Princeton as the 2, who was technically a 3 at 36 in the draw. So they have to really like, what they were dealt as well. And it seems, just because of where they are, those 2 areas every year pretty much they're stacked all the time in sort of that mid to low end range, and they seem to get those teams. Who's not, well, I'll leave it there. I think those, to me, are the teams that I'm looking at first off, that I think are just really happy with what they got.
It's a praise Chris sort of podcast, so I'll start with the positive. I called Chris last night to help prepare me for the selection shows. One of the scenarios he laid out is, where does Florida State go? Because if Florida State is sent to South Carolina, it opens up the possibility for a far more competitive and entertaining UCF draw, which, again, they play Miami, who beat them earlier this season. Match 1, obviously, to have USF Florida in that second match. That's a really fun one. Battle for the state of Florida on the line there. You prepared me for the scenario. Shout out to you. You've also sucked all the fun, all the surprise out of all of it. So I think that part needs to be argued as
Gruskin,
well.
every year I get to be a an older and older
Yep.
version of Nate Silver. Like first I'm like 2019 Nate Silver, then I'm 23. Can I just be prenatal Nate Silver? Like
You're
that's all.
no, you're 08 to 12, where we didn't know enough about him to question anything, and the predictions were just hot. Again, that veil of
But this,
mystery.
yeah, this really is all the fun nowadays, right? Is just trying to predict where the teams are going to go and how that part is all going to work out because we haven't really put the effort into trying to automate that whole selection criteria piece of it. And it is kind of fun. But yeah, that Florida State was a big domino. Like I just for the life of me, the best bracket to put at UCF, if you put Florida State at South Carolina, was exactly what we got, and I just had a hard time stomaching that we were going to send those three schools to UCF, which is why in the bracket that I put out, I put Florida State at UCF because I just couldn't see putting Miami as a 4 at UCF, which is in the end it is the bracket that minimizes the number of flights, and that's what they did.
Very fair. Jay, your thoughts on the men's draw? Who are you most comfortable with if you're sleeping at night as a coach?
Well, if we're talking about these non-hosts, I think Baylor has to be really happy that Texas A&M secured that number 16 seed because it makes them, they're drive down to College Station. Maybe they can bring some fans. It's a big state, so it's not super drivable, but it's doable. And they're thrilled. I think this is a Texas A&M team that has sort of limped through the finish line, and a Baylor team that is very worthy of a top 16 seed that just missed being a top 16. So from an integrity standpoint, this feels like a very good matchup between two top 20 teams. It also feels very winnable for a Baylor team that unfortunately will not be a host, despite being the final site host. So I think this breathes some life into their chances to making the Sweet 16.
Yeah, again, to not have to go to Texas, to get to go to A&M, no one's happier for the double bounce than they are, certainly. And by the way, it's a rematch between them and Nebraska, which was a really fun round one battle. Nebraska, first NCAA tournament in over a decade. Shout out to our guy, Peter Cobelt. Heck of a job done by the Huskers. Wins over Michigan SC this season. Two I would add to your lists. I think if you're Texas in the immediate future, knowing Duke and Tennessee can go to war in the previous weekend, and then the winner has to come to Austin the very next week, like let them do war, root for the longest 4-3 possible, though there is a week layoff there. I also would quietly throw San Diego on the list because their eighth of the draw is all California teams. And to have it be whether it's Cal, if they hold seed, whether it be a UCLA team staying hot, again, road runs through San Diego. And to have that sort of advantage, the distinct advantage of the conditions and the courts they play on as well, will we see Vassar or not? Fair question. But they get to do it at home. They've never hosted an NCAA tournament match before. Now they get to host the first three, and it's a lot of California schools who are more prominent in positioning and conference, and they're all going to have to come down to San Diego for that one. So I think they love it. I would also quietly put Columbia on that list. Yeah, it's tough if it's NC State or if it's Georgia, but you beat NC State at home, and you maybe get them at home again, which is all you can really ask for if you're the Lions, particularly, again, having to grind things out, sweat it out through Ivy League season. Those would be my final teams. Jay, then Chris, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good point about San Diego. San Diego, who benefits from that flip over Virginia to be the number 6 seed. Agree or disagree with that, but you're right. It's going to be a lot of familiarity for them there, so I think that's a really good call.
Chris?
Yeah, I think the your added call there on the Texas region, like an absolute dream region for them. Look, I mean, Michigan, it's gonna be very evident when lineups are submitted. Gavin Young's out, right? If you were at the Big Tens, you saw him in a cast, right? He's not playing. Don't know the status of Kate, but he hasn't played in quite a while, so that's a very depleted team. Texas has got, they've got to really like what they've been dealt and even potentially, certainly in their first round match anyway, gives them the opportunity because they are managing a few guys still with injury, right? Gives them an opportunity to do a little more management, possibly. So I think they have to really like what they were dealt.
Or if Michigan and Cornell do battle and whomever comes out of that, again, whatever it may be, maybe you play all of Ojakar, Erickson, and Brown just to get them all reps, and you pull one of the top four guys thinking, okay, maybe we have a little comfort there. Yeah, again, I think Texas has to be feeling pretty good about their pathway as well. Let's go the other way now. The tough road ahead. That's where the fun conversations begin. John J. Parsons, any direction you want to go on the women's side? Who is banging their head against the table here tonight?
Well, number one, it's Oklahoma, right? Getting Oklahoma State there, top 20 program, despite being a six seed. Also a program that, like I said, with Baylor and A&M, they can bring fans to that match and they can certainly be vocal. So Oklahoma, certainly a draw loser with their tough road ahead. We talked about some other seeds. So Washington as the 16 seed getting Cal. One team we haven't talked about though is NC State. So
Mm.
NC State has not been playing with their number one singles player in Michaela Lackey. They potentially will draw UCF in the second round, a UCF team that was close to getting a top 16 seed, but lost there in the Big 12 final to Texas Tech. So I think that is a tricky match for NC State, albeit I think most matches here in the second round would be a tricky match for them. And then I would say Vanderbilt. I would say of these teams that I was most curious about who were going to be a two seed in one of these regions, you had your California schools. It was UCLA, a UCLA team that is a veteran team, didn't make as deep of a run in the Big Ten tournament as they needed to secure a top 16 seed. But they play Vanderbilt in the second round, and certainly they can be competitive with them 1 through 6 and doubles. So I think Vanderbilt's probably not thrilled that they drew UCLA, who just a lot of unknowns and question marks. And we've seen that UCLA team already in past years go on the road as an unseeded team and knock off a team like Duke. So no reason that UCLA can't do that again against Vanderbilt.
Hans, Wagle, Luke Meyer, all parts of teams who did that. Yeah, very well pointed out. Obviously, for head coach Stella Sampras Webster to have to face her daughter, Sophia Webster, on Vanderbilt, mentioned in the selection show. It's a storyline. Chris, who popped out to you on the women's side?
Yeah, I mean it's all the same schools that you guys just called out with it, with the addition of the one you called out, in the first segment when we were talking about them, and that being Texas Tech. They can't. I mean, they absolutely can't love seeing Stanford coming to them. Of all the things they could have had, things looked pretty decent for I think what they could have gotten. And yeah, I do think when I was doing my draws, I was just using draw parity, and I put UCLA at Vandy and all the way down to UCF at NC State, and then I got to something where I ended up with a couple of the schools in the same conference, and I ended up having to switch things up, but they found a way to get around that, and I think that UCLA matchup. For Vandy is going to be a particularly tough one. And that match is not even going to be getting played at Vandy, right? They're going to play those matches, I believe, at Middle Tennessee because of the forecourt situation at Vanderbilt. So I'm sure they'll still have the hometown fans and crowd there. Maybe a little less than usual, with just drawing some passerbys from campus potentially, but a little that may add a little takeaway to it, and tough. I'll tell you. Well, actually, I'll save that thought.
Oh, please go ahead.
No, no, I go
Fair
on.
enough. Fair enough. You'll keep that one in the clip and save it for later. I like that. No, I mean, look, this is obviously a very fascinating one. You mentioned it, Jay, and it was one I was thinking about as well. That NC State regional, not only just without Lockheed, but again, UCF puts 3 hours on the board. They make you work. They grind everywhere. Obviously, Rylet at 6, probably the most aggressive. They play really sound, though, in aggressive doubles as well. Doubles-wise, it's going to be a fantastic matchup. Singles-wise, it's a complete contrast of styles, I feel like, across the board, NC State, UCF, and that will make for some really, really fun tennis. Obviously, you mentioned Washington. To get Cal, maybe the most dangerous unseeded team in the draw if they're healthy. I think even Georgia is sweating a little if that's the round of 16 matchup, maybe more so than if it is a relatively more unknown Washington team. But yeah, I mean, you nailed the big one. If you're Oklahoma, you're just like, really? Like, We worked our way into the top 8. We did all of this, and you're going to gift us number 18 or 20, whatever they'll finish Oklahoma State. Like, yeah, of course, I would argue biggest picture, they are the most frustrating. Even if you look beyond that, some familiar opponents ahead. By the way, we didn't get to see these two play in conference play, so maybe that's a sign from the gods. Let these rivals continue to compete season in, season out. All right, that's the men's side of things, women's side of things, excuse me. Chris, take me over to the men's side of things. Whose draw do you look at and you go, uh-oh, we're in for a long one?
Well, we've talked about UCF. I mean, Florida loved it because of how level it is. UCF, like, they're looking at it not, I mean, I think all in all, from the chances of escaping the entire region, you like it better than having Florida State there. But you don't get like the fact that you get Miami, a team you've already lost to, as your 4 seed that you play on the first day. You're wanting one of those, cupcake matches that, you're going to kind of cruise through and hopefully watch Florida and USF beat the heck out of each other for 3.5 hours. And then, you come in fresh the next day. That's not happening for them. I'll tell you, if I'm Mississippi State, I'm not happy about seeing Michigan State come to town. Like, I think there were a couple options there. There were the first 2 flights had to be Harvard and Michigan State, and if you threw them in a draw parity order, it would have been Harvard to Mississippi State and Michigan State to Arizona. I think both schools would have preferred to see Harvard coming than Michigan State. So I think that one's another tough one. But certainly the big school right now that's going, yeah, we knew it. I mean, we absolutely knew it was coming because of the travel matrix. But Cal having to take UCLA after everything they just did, that doesn't feel good for them, right? They watched what UCLA did. They went into Columbus and won, and now you're going to make that team, a 17 and send them over to you in the first round. That seems a little brutal for them. I think, there's some other really good matches, but I think those are the teams that are like, yeah, we feel like we just got a little bit of a shaft.
No, and to your point, Cal also faces a really frisky Boise State team that's coming off of a tough loss in the conference tournament final against New Mexico. Like, again, they got in on their own volition. They beat Michigan State earlier this season. Has a ton of confidence as a group. That's a tough region for Cal, no doubt about it. Chris, Jay, your thoughts?
I mean, I think Chris talked about the major ones. I think Tennessee probably doesn't love having Duke, a Duke team that seems to be playing much better tennis right now, but those are matchups that you expect in the second round between a 14 seed and a Duke team that will be in the top 20. But that one does feel tricky for Tennessee, certainly.
Yeah, no, the UCF one. And just in general, as you guys mentioned, this bottom right portion of the draw, even if you want to project a little further, this TCU quarter. First of all, how healthy is TCU? I got no clue. I saw him at the Big 12 tournament and obviously didn't get to see Cooper, didn't get to see Pedro. Pedrico goes down with an injury in the semifinal as well. Jack rolls his ankle during that tournament also. You had similar questions going into last year's, but this team's obviously younger than last year's team was, less experienced, less versed in postseason play, and we haven't seen Pedro, obviously, in quite some time for them to look. That Oklahoma-Illinois winner is a really good team in round number 2. After that, if it's a UCF team who has already beaten them, if it's any of those teams that emerge from that death UCF region, that gets really tough as well. And then potentially looming, by the way, in this section, round of 16, if it's Colton versus Rafa, like, scouts should be in attendance. If this was the NFL and this was bowl season, they're playing for the number 1 draft pick, Rafa versus Colton, of who's going to be the better pro, who's going to be ranked higher come this time next season. This is, I don't know if anyone in this, again, TCU quarter of the draw feels great with the postseason looming, just given how loaded it is, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Virginia is a draw loser if you look that far ahead into the Sweet 16. I think any of the top 8 seeds that we're going to draw Arizona in the round of 16, that would be the team I'd want to play least, given that they can go 2-0 against any team in the country. Now, Virginia might be one of only 1 or 2 schools that could also go 2-0 against Arizona. That is like strength on strength for sure. But Yeah, that one is really scary. And again, they got moved down to 7. If they were at 4, they would not have to play this Arizona team in the Sweet 16. But I would want no part as a top 8 seed to try and be in the way of Colton Smith's journey to try and make history here for Arizona and reach the quarterfinals. And it's looked like it's going to have to be the Cavaliers.
Yeah, so fascinated. Final word on this, Chris, belongs to you.
Yeah, to the one interesting one here, everybody outside of the schools that don't really have an option and have to submit a waiver has to have indoor courts as a backup, right? So I'll pose this question to you. Where does Texas A&M always play their indoor matches?
I thought it was going to be Baylor, but is it not Baylor?
Well, I'm just saying that's where they always play indoor,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Who's in
that's
their
really
region?
funny. Oh, that's really funny.
Like I
Oh,
don't
wow.
honestly know. I don't know. I just, that's just a thought.
That's
I
good.
don't honestly know if they, A, if that's what they submitted, B, if you even have to submit a specific site, or if it can be sort of fluid and it's like, hey, if Baylor's not at home, we're going to go to Baylor, but if either they're home or if we happen to be playing them, then we go to SMU. I don't know what the options are, but it just strikes me as wow, because there is rain projected later in the week in College Station. So like what would actually happen if it was raining and they had to take, a Baylor Texas A&M match if both of those teams managed to get through day one indoors? That would be really funny.
Oh, it's a fun scenario to plan out. Well, with that said, last thing I want to do before I let you guys go, and again, full breakdowns of the draws, these two making predictions because I'm too scared. All of those things coming up tomorrow, Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, live here on our Cracked Rackets YouTube channel, available the next day on the Great Shot podcast feed. Coverage starts this weekend on ESPN Plus. Make sure that subscription's renewed. Let's get excited. One last thing to get excited about with the postseason ahead. Nothing I enjoy doing more. I'm a glass half full sort of guy. I will start with you, Jay. On the women's side, could be a first round matchup, can be a projection, can be an individual singles matchup. Give me 1 to 17 things you're most excited for.
Ooh, okay. Let's go. Let's think
It's a
through this.
lot to choose from. Do you want me to go
Yeah,
first?
sure. Yeah, why don't you give us some?
Yeah, well, obviously Oklahoma State opening weekend. That had to be number one on the list again. Stella versus Sophia Webster. How is that not fun? Or just fascinating? Maybe the last thing it is fun. Um,
I'll give you one, Gruskin.
okay,
I think
NC State UCF.
the potential final in Austin.
Mm.
I called a match
Mm.
between Texas and Baylor earlier this year, and that was an absolute dogfight. And so maybe Texas seems to be on a little bit of a roll now with Zaynalova back, and maybe not quite as easy as it might have seemed three weeks ago, maybe when they looked like they were reeling. But nevertheless, that match was a battle, and I think that one could get really interesting.
This would have been toughest road ahead, but also counts for most excited for. I'm excited to see if I can get the name Cadence Brace correct down this postseason stretch. Shout out to Colette for correcting me. Apologies to the Brace family. Cadence Brace correct. Jay, we've bought you time. What you got for us?
Well, on the cadence brace front, I mean, LSU likely will play USC in the second round. And this has been a USC team that had their season sort of started with a loss to Auburn and now potentially could end with a loss to LSU. Some struggles against the SEC. So very curious to see how that plays out. Certainly you would favor USC towards the bottom of the lineup, but LSU did list Florentine Deckers at number 5 in their lineups here. She
Mm.
has not played this season. She played at 1 for them last year. So that is something that I will be very curious to monitor because that would make for a very interesting second round match. And I think the big thing in terms of potential Sweet 16 matchups is we talked about Vanderbilt does have a tough road, but if they do get there, they will have a rematch with Texas A&M. This Vanderbilt team, the only team not named Georgia who has beaten Texas A&M this season, and so that has a ton of storylines in and of itself.
Granularly, if there's an Honor Stoyana matchup, sign me up for that. If Broadus is healthy and it's potentially Pepperdine versus Tennessee, sign
She's
me up for
not.
that.
She's not
Yeah.
listed.
Well, still, Pepperdine Frisky. I'm excited to see that matchup. A lot of new faces in the NCAA tournament for both of those teams. Stanford, Texas Tech, all really good. And again, we will break that down. We'll break down lineups, etc. on tomorrow's show with Jay. Let's go the other side. Chris Halioris, kick us off. What's the thing you're most excited for? Initial reaction to this men's draw?
I mean, obviously, first weekend, the whole UCF region, and I'll call a sneaky call out, I think, actually, to the San Diego region, just before they
Mm.
even get out of there. I mean, UCI is no walk. I mean, no cupcake four. They're not really a four. That's another three, I think, that snuck in to being a four because of travel. They're like 401 miles to Stanford, so that was out. So they go to San Diego. I think that's also a sneaky good region. But Jay alluded to it earlier. If I want to project to the next weekend in the super regional matches that I think just it's going to be hard to not happen, I am very much looking forward to an Arizona Virginia super regional. I mean, that's probably, as I'm staring at the board here, the super regional that I'm most looking forward to seeing. That could be very intriguing.
I like it. John J. Parsons, thoughts?
Yeah, a section of this draw we haven't talked about is Stanford as your number 4
You
seed,
beat me
who
to it.
I think one would fall into the category of like where they're at. Like going round by round, this Stanford team has a very workable draw,
They
but
love
more
this draw.
granularly. Sorry, what was that?
I said they love this draw.
Yes, we
Like,
should have called them out in the
Yeah.
they like where they're at because they like the whole
yeah,
half.
yeah.
They're very happy with
I
this
like their
draw.
path to the semifinals. I mean, gee,
Exactly. But granularly, I think this region is fun with Pepperdine versus Alabama. Alabama having Philip Planinchek, your NCAA singles champion from May of last year, versus a Pepperdine team that's just getting healthy. So that should be a really good first round match. Two schools that are not even close to the same conference, don't play each other often. So excited for that one, and then see if either of those two teams can give Stanford a run for their money because we could be starting to see a run for Stanford here.
Oh, it's a fascinating section of the draw, certainly. And yeah, I mean, across the board. How about Planinchek versus Winter, round one, that Alabama Pepperdine match? That's going to be as good a tennis as we see anywhere all weekend long. I mean, yeah, you guys hit a lot of the big ones. NC State, Georgia will tell me a lot because that Georgia team is super talented. But NC State's been really good all season long. And for them to not clinch a top 8 seed, that team is top 8 worthy with the resume they put together this season and certainly have been a part of that pack, no pun intended, competing for it all season long. So a lot of good matchups, excited for predictions, lineups, all the things that come with the mayhem ahead. Yeah, I'll offer you each final thoughts, and then we'll get to our CY interview. John J. Parsons, let's start with you. Any final thoughts as we head towards the postseason?
I feel like these draws are generally pretty balanced. I feel like last season there was some imbalance in some of the draws, but I feel like generally these feel pretty much parity when you look at the top 16 seeds. So I'm excited. We normally see, 1 to 3, maybe top 16 seeds not advance through to the Super Regional. So I would expect maybe a little less than that on the women's side. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be a very fun weekend. Hopefully, we get good weather throughout the country.
It's going to be fun. Chris Halioris, last thoughts belong to you.
yeah, I will say that I will do my best for all the listeners. Hopefully, everybody's watching now to get both the men's and women's bracket challenge up and running, so everybody can have a little fun with it, and we'll track that. I'll do my best to have that up tomorrow. I think play will start Friday, so that gives you a couple days to mull things over. But by all means, make your picks on paper now, and we will have the bracket challenge up at some point here.
Well, I'm looking forward to participating in that under a pseudonym, and I'm very much looking forward to speaking with each of you the next 2 nights as we further break down what the mayhem is going to look like. Appreciate all of you who tolerated a lot of my face here today, a lot of my voice. College tennis fans, obviously, I wouldn't get the opportunities we have. We wouldn't have the chance to do this without all of your support. We're so excited for the start of the mayhem. Obviously, again, Friday, ESPN Plus. Make sure your subscription is renewed. We're going to have a lot of regional action. A shout out in advance to Daniel Westoff. What sort of a job does he do, Chris?
A fuck of an editing day in, day out.
Makes everything possible. Looking forward to it and looking forward to interacting with all of you throughout the rest of this postseason as well. But one last thing before we go. Again, all of these decisions made by that NCAA tennis committee, wouldn't it be nice to speak with the chair of that committee? We have my conversation with the chair for all of you next. Here it is, my talk with our dear friend, Chris Young. Joining us on the podcast once again today to help talk through all of the decisions we saw for this 2025 NCAA tournament, a man you will all know best as a returning champion, of course, to this show, head coach of the Oklahoma State women's tennis program and chair of the NCAA tennis committee. It's our friend, Chris Young, joining us once again. Coach, thank you for taking the time to do this. I imagine it was a busy weekend for you and the committee. How are you feeling here today? You ready for postseason play to begin?
Yeah, ready to go. Congratulations to all the teams who have been selected, and we're just excited for everybody to get the opportunity to compete in the postseason and looking forward to a great weekend of tennis ahead.
No, and certainly, again, I want to ask you some questions about that selection process and some of the thoughts that went into determining what this year's field would look like. For you just personally, and I always like to mention this, people don't realize you are a tennis nerd. Like, you kind of love it. Talk to me about the energy in that room and just, again, to have that sort of responsibility. I know it is not one the committee takes lightly. Talk me through what that selection process looks like, not just in the moment, but all season long.
Yeah, I think we have a really great committee. I'm really proud of the committee that we have, the way that everybody works together. We have a lot of talented people in the room. It's made up of coaches and administrators at all levels up to the AD level. And this committee works really hard all year long. There's conference calls on a monthly basis and a lot of information that's exchanged all throughout the year. And people are paying attention to what's going on throughout college tennis and how we can help it. And it's a culmination of getting to this point. And ultimately, we want the student athletes to have a great experience. We want their experience in the national championships to be something that they feel is worthy of all the hard work that they put in all year long. And we want everybody leading into the national championships this year in Waco to feel like it's the ride of their life and something that they can have memories to look forward to for the rest of their life. And so as a committee, we take that very seriously. We want to do everything we can to give everyone the best experience possible, given, the responsibility that we have to do that.
No, I appreciate the candid answer and certainly getting to hang out with the committee a little bit as I did during the individual event in Waco. Very fun crew, some better at pool than others, but we can save that for a different time. But no, and so through that process, and I both credit and blame college tennis's Nate Silver, Chris Halioris, who has offered such great insight for casual college tennis fans into what this process looks like, the 400-mile rule, driving versus flight consideration, some of the tiebreakers that are built into the formula you guys use to help guide this process. My first question for you, that formula, that predetermined formula for helping to guide this process, how much of that is leaned upon versus, adjusting the draw accordingly to try and maintain integrity? Draws will be out by the time this is released. The most prominent example, again, dare I say your school, heading to Oklahoma because of the driving distance, Notre Dame heading to Ohio State because of the driving distance. How much is it the predetermined formula versus, adjusting for parity?
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on here as you reached out and said, would it be something that as the chair of the committee, we could speak on behalf of the NCAA? It's something I know happens in other sports. We haven't done it in tennis. And so we talked about it as a committee. I think that we need to get this information out there. I think it's really important that people just are educated about the whole process. And I think a lot of times people feel like that we have a little bit more authority and power in the seeding process than we actually do have, because of some of the principles that are in place, like you talked about. The biggest, I would say, obstacle that we have when making the draw is the 400-mile rule. If you're within 400 miles of a location and you can drive to that, then it means you can drive to that location given the NCAA parameters. You must be sent to that. If there's multiple locations, that gives us a little bit more flexibility. But, there's some places in the draw, as you've seen, where a school can only drive to one particular place, my school included. And so, there's no favors given to people on the committee. You mentioned myself, you mentioned Notre Dame, Allison's also on the committee. And so, right away, that that's where that school is going, because their only opportunity to be placed in the draw is somewhere that they can drive to within 400 miles. And so as you start to plug in all of those schools, it takes away a lot of flexibility of the draw. It really hurts the integrity of the draw. And certain situations. And so, you once you kind of get those things plugged in, that's where the hard work of the committee really begins, is what can we do now with what we have left to protect the integrity of the draw in the best way that we possibly can. Not trying it the best that we can, not to send people to the same side year after year. And that's sometimes challenging and difficult because of this same parameter. But the number one guiding principle is the 400-mile rule, and that takes precedent over everything. And there's no choice in that. It's not like we can say, well, this person could go because they're 400 miles. No, they have to go there. And so, we've tried the last 2 years to send it to the competition oversight committee. There is a pilot program that soccer has. Volleyball has just women's volleyball is now a part of that program. And we're going to, as a committee, submit again our request for tennis to be men's and women's to be added to that for next year. We've done it for the last 2 years and we've been shot down. But our goal as a committee, we always sit down at the end of every year in the summer and we put some goals for our committee for the next year. And one of our goals has always been to get back into the NCAA rotation for the championships being on TV. And we're glad to say that this year we're a part of the ESPN package for the championship being one of the championships back on TV. That was a huge goal for us because we didn't want tennis to get left behind as ESPN and the NCAA were formulating their coverage for the championships. We were able to accomplish that. And now, our next big goal is to continue to push to be a part of the program, which allows us more flexibility in the draw.
No, and just first and foremost, that's why I wanted to text you, because they do this in basketball, they do this with football, we should do this in tennis, and that's why I'm forever grateful that you are always receptive of our nonsense and willing to come on this show to talk about this, because as much as Chris, myself, Jay have tried, others as well, I don't think people are aware of that 400-mile rule. And for instance, because we all think it, well, wait, Oklahoma State is pretty close to Texas, right? Why couldn't you guys have gone to, and sorry to use your team as an example, but it's a prominent one. It's just that's outside of 400 miles, right? And because Oklahoma is not, that's the rule.
Yeah, exactly. We, according to the NCAA calculations, we're 87 miles away from Norman. I believe we were about 415 miles from Texas A&M and 439 miles from Texas. So even though those are two, schools that would be close to us and no longer a conference opponent now in Texas, which is another factor. Once you get past the 400-mile rule, you cannot have a conference. You can't have two conference teams in the same pod. And so when you think about those two factors alone, that really gives you some challenges putting a draw together with integrity and doing the best that you can. So I feel like every year we have challenges, but we're able to do a pretty good job. And I feel like we did the best job that we could given those two parameters. I'd like to also say that, for me, just taking out, any consideration, I only work in the men's room. So I don't work in the women's room. I'm not in there when they're doing any of their work at all. I'm on the men's committee side. I lead the committee. And then we all come together once the draws are done, but it just takes away any bias. And then we ask any coaches who are in the room and their team is being discussed to leave the room and to not participate. So, I think the committee does a very good job of being non-biased in these situations. And it just is what it is when it comes to some of these parameters. And there is some imbalance that is going to happen from time to time, but we try to do the best that we can. And, one of the things that we try to do is we try to first look at the 1 and 2 lines, and that's our main goal to start. And the 1 and 2 lines, we want to get them as close to 33, 34 as possible when the seeds matching up. And then, then we go to 2s and 3s and then 3s and 4s and try to do the best that we can to balance it out the best that we can. But we sure want to focus on making the best, integrity of the bracket as possible, given the parameters that we have.
No, and I wanted to establish that as part one, because part two is there are some scenarios. One of the teams we were most focused on the men's side, Florida State, who had options. They could go to South Carolina. They could go to UCF, but if they went to UCF, now Miami can't go there, and that has to be considered as well. To your point, the 400-mile rule reigns supreme. But you guys were able to make an adjustment there. And so I guess just for fans who are curious, particularly as it relates to the 3s and 4s as well, you do parity within the draw, again, integrity as the term that's become fashionable, that is considered. You guys do have the opportunity to adjust if the 400 rule is equal.
A little bit, but if you look at that one specifically, Miami could only go to UCF.
Yeah.
That's the only place they could go to. So once they're there, Florida State can no longer go there because Florida State has two options they can drive to, both UCF and South Carolina. So, once you take away the UCF option, then Florida State has to go to South Carolina. So, you have to look at all things considered. And Miami only had one option. South Florida only had one option. Florida. So, that's a very strong regional, but you had four teams that could drive to UCF. The only one of those that could have gone outside of that was South Carolina. And once Miami is a part of that, because the only option for Miami is UCF, then that puts Florida State at South Carolina.
Yeah, well, makes a lot of sense to me. Again, this is why I leave it to Chris, so he can figure out the permutations and prepare us all. Other Chris, I should say. Chris 2, because very clearly we know who Chris 1 is. One is chair of something. The other owns a chair. That's the difference. The other prominent thing I wanted to, I have to ask about, because this was another thing to look. By the rules, by the tie breaks, Texas A&M, 18 in the country, they had the opportunity for the double jump. UCLA, obviously, with their winning of the Big Ten tournament crown, they had jumped up to 16. But Texas A&M, points negligible between 16 and 18. Again, you go to the criteria. You have the points. You have the head-to-head strength of schedule, head-to-head, top 50 opponents, a record versus common opponents. By those metrics, as you can run it on Chris's website, Halioris. Okay, that's going to be tough for this show. That's the last reference he gets. But you can run the numbers. A&M leaps Duke. A&M leaps UCLA. Was there a discussion about that at all, leaving out a Big Ten, or just more broadly, a conference tournament champion? What did that decision look like in the room?
No, there's really no discussion because that's the criteria that we have. And so for us as a committee, we've used the criteria. The easiest way for us to defend these decisions is to have a set criteria that everyone knows going into it. I think that's part of this discussion that we're having with you now, is just try to continue to educate people. This is what the criteria is. And this is not something that we're sitting in the room and we're giving our opinions about. This is the criteria, and we're saying this is how the criteria works, and we're taking the human element out of it as much as possible when possible, because there's always going to be a bias in there when you get the human element possible. So this is the criteria that everyone knew before the season. This is the four elements, as you talked about, ITA ranking, head-to-head, wins versus in, which becomes the wins versus the top 50 is the way that we look at that, and then common opponents. And so when you look at those four criteria, that's how people can jump up or down and move around. And that's what happened. Texas A&M was able to do a double jump. I mean, congratulations to UCLA. That's a great win for them in the Big Ten, and they're to be commended for that. And but there was no human element of trying for us to decide which team do we feel like is better between those two. We just went off the criteria that was given.
Yeah, and again, adjusting that, something I will ask about a little bit later when we get back to that pilot program. I'll ask 3 questions for you. Any hesitation in sending a team to the same site multiple years? You alluded to it earlier. That I made the joke on the selection show, death, taxes, South Carolina headed to North Carolina for regional play. And just, again, there are some schools, conferences, driving distance. The ACC, SEC, it lines up very simply. Can you discuss how that factors in?
Yeah, you're referring, I believe, to South Carolina going to North Carolina on the women's side. I believe that's the third year in a row. And, I'd have to get a little bit more information from someone on the committee and the women's side. I know that was a discussion when we all came together was, could there be some movement? What could we do there? But just because of the drive and the 400 miles, it really was limiting. I can speak to a situation, we had on the men's side where we had almost the same 4 teams going to Columbia at one point in time. And it's like, we can't have the same regional that we had last year. How can we try to adjust? And the only way to do that was on the 2 line. We were able to make an adjustment there. And then we were able to switch the 3 and 4 lines. So at least there was different matchups that Columbia was not playing the same team that they played last year. And so, that's the best that you can do it sometimes is, you don't want the teams to have to go every year to know, look, if I make the national championships, I'm exactly going here. So we hope that we're going to have more flexibility in the draw moving forward. We hope we can be a part of this program, and that's our goal.
Talk me about the program. What is it for fans who haven't heard of it already? Why is it something that college tennis fans should be interested in?
What's going to give us more flexibility? You're going to always have the 1 through 16s, but then your 17 32, you're going to be grouped in groups of 4. So we're going to be able to have a 13 through 16 be able to be matched up with a 17 through 20. And so at least for integrity of the draw, you're going to have in pods of 4. They would have to be placed there. Now, the biggest issue is, are we going to continue with conference realignment to be able to hold true to not having 2 teams from the same conference in the same regional? With the conference realignment, that's really given us some challenges and some new challenges. So we're going through the draw. We thought we had some pretty good moves that we could make, and then we realized, oh no, those are now conference teams now. Who would have thought some of these teams are now in the same conference as each other, and you get caught on that. So as long as we have teams within the same conference not being able to be at the regional, that's gonna still present some challenges. But hopefully this new program will allow us to group the 1s and the 2s, especially the 1s and 2s, at least in groups of 4. And that will give us a lot more integrity of the draw, especially in the top lines.
Yeah, no, it's, again, exciting. It's an exciting concept, one I would certainly love to see experimented with. Why not? We're experimenting with fall college individuals. Why not try this for the NCAA tournament as well? I do think... Oh, please.
And not to cut you off. I mean, we're telling everybody, if you're a college coach listening to this, talk to your administrators, talk to people that you may know that are on that competition oversight committee, and let them know that, your feelings about this. Everybody says, with tennis, we pay for first and second rounds. Why shouldn't we have more flexibility? I think make your voices heard, find people that are on that committee, and let them know that that's one of the ways that we're going to enact this change.
Yeah, no, certainly something to continue to discuss, and I appreciate you coming on the show to discuss it today. Now that the draw is out, what is your next day activity? Is your phone open? Is it blowing up even more so than Chris 2's? Like, what's it look like as you try to prepare yourself and your team for postseason play?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully everybody understands, through the draw, and hopefully through this discussion, that we did the best that we could with the draw, and now it's just time to move forward and everybody go play and compete and do that. There are questions, and so people, obviously can ask questions of the committee. Myself being the spokesperson of the committee, John Bugner does an amazing job. I think we're very fortunate to have him with the NCAA and his experience now doing it for many years and having the relationships that he has. I know a lot of coaches feel comfortable talking to him, but shortly releasing online is going to be the lineups, and so teams will be able to look at that, and if there's any challenge or protest, then we'll deal with that in the committee. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes while, some of us coaches are still trying to get our teams ready as well. But at the end of the day, we want to try to protect the integrity of the tournament, protect the experience of the student athletes, and that's what we're all here for. It's a voluntary position to be able to get, the best out there, and we want to just be able to have a voice in trying to help this tournament run as smoothly as possible.
Well, we appreciate that. If you need another volunteer for the protest committee, you have my number. So certainly, again, looking forward to this postseason, looking forward to watching the Cowgirls compete as well, and sincerely appreciate all you do behind the scenes to help make everything run on time here in college tennis. So chair, of course, of the NCAA Tennis Committee, head coach for the Oklahoma State women's tennis team, Coach Chris Young, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.